Resourceful Designer, episode 246, How Not to Treat Your Clients.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He can still recite the McDonald's Big Mac song from the 80s. Mark DeCote.
To all beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. Yep, how many of you remember that commercial from the 80s? Anyway, in this episode, I'm going to share a story on how not to treat your clients. And I'm also going to share a resource that will help you communicate better with your clients. Now, what have I been up to? Well, one fun thing I've been doing is I've got a new client in an industry that I'm not that familiar with. So I've been spending a lot of time this week just doing some research into their industry and just find out the nuances because it's something I'm not familiar with. And if I'm going to be designing for them, I need to be familiar. I want to be familiar, I should say. Because the more I am, the better I can design things for them. The more of the problem solver, the solution finder I will be. So that's one thing I've been doing this week. I have been working on a couple of websites for some clients as well as one of my own. Did a couple of podcast artworks, not as many as in previous weeks. Didn't have that many orders come in this week, but still got a few of them done, some fun ones. I've also been tweaking my social media, my Instagram and my LinkedIn, just updating the profiles a little bit and that sort of thing. And of course, I'm getting the Resourceful Designer community ready for it to reopen on March 1st. And we have some really good things happening in there. We're actually looking at getting a financial expert in to talk to community members about retirement and how to work that into your business. So that's one of the community members is organizing that. So that should be kind of cool. And we've got a lot of other things planned within the community. So if you want to know more about it, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/community. And now this week's resource of the week. Now, this week's resource is ScreenFlow. As I mentioned in the intro, this is a great way for communicating things with your clients. I use ScreenFlow. In case you don't know, ScreenFlow is a screen recorder. You can also record via your video camera if you have a camera hooked up to your computer. And I use ScreenFlow all the time to do screen captures for creating tutorials for clients and such. Just this past week, I had one of the agencies that I work with. It's a podcasting agency. And they needed access to one of my podcast clients' websites in order to help publish their podcast episodes. And all my clients' websites have two-factor authentication turned on. And this agency, their person at the agency they deal with, was having some trouble logging in. And they asked me, is there a better way? Because the way they were doing it with two-factor authentication is when they'd go log in, they'd put in their username and password, and then they would have to wait for an email to show up with a special code for them to put in on the next screen. And they were saying sometimes it would take 10, 15 minutes for that email to show up. So I told them that there's an easier way to do it if you just have the Authenticator app on your phone. So instead of explaining the whole thing, I just created a video to show them how to set it up. It was a 2 or 3 minute video, sent it to them, and they just watched it and walked them through, and it was so easy. And I use ScreenFlow for doing things like that all the time. Anytime I give a client a new WordPress website, I give them videos that I've made showing them how to create blog posts or do whatever they need. So anyways, ScreenFlow is a great application. I've been using it for years. Another thing that I love about ScreenFlow is it sits in your menu bar. There's a quick access button there, but one of the features is to hide desktop icons. And I've mentioned before in the podcast that I usually have a messy desktop, both my computer desktop and my physical desktop. But all the icons on my computer desktop, with an easy drop down the menu and say hide desktop icons, all the icons disappear. So now if I want to do a screen capture and they see my desktop, they don't see all those icons. And you can use that even if you're not using ScreenFlow. I can hide the icons if I'm doing a Zoom call and I need to share my screen on a Zoom call. I usually will hide the icons because I don't want people to see all the different icons, them getting distracted trying to see all the different files I have on my computer. So it's just another perk of ScreenFlow. Now, ScreenFlow is a Mac-only program. There are equivalents for Windows. Camtasia Studio is one that I can think of. But I love ScreenFlow, and I think you would too. And if you want to check it out, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/ScreenFlow. And now, how not to treat your clients. Now, this isn't going to be a very long episode. In fact, there's only one message that I want to convey, and that's to treat your clients right, or they won't be your clients for very long. Here's a bit of backstory. Several months ago, I quoted on a branding and web design project for a client. This was an existing client of mine who I had done a few different projects for before. Well, this client was starting something new and she wanted my help. So I gave her a price, she agreed on the price, I sent her a contract, which she promptly signed and returned along with the deposit that I asked for. Now, because of the nature of the project, which I'm not going to get into here, but we had to wait several months before we can actually start anything. In fact, the project wasn't supposed to start until January of this year. But a couple of months ago, the client contacted me. The nature of her business involves large gatherings of people. And of course, with the pandemic obviously affecting things, she informed me that she was putting the project on indefinite hold. And she didn't know when or if she would ever revive it. Now, according to my contract, deposits are non-refundable. However, I did tell her that should she revive this project within 6 months, I would honor the original quote and I would honor the deposit that she had given me. And that was that, or so I had thought. Well, earlier this week, the client contacted me. As it turns out, the project wasn't actually put on indefinite hold like she told me. What had happened was another designer who happened to specialize in this client's niche contacted her and offered to do the project for almost half of what I had quoted. Now, I've talked about niching before on the podcast and how having a niche gives you an advantage because when you are in a niche, you are perceived as an expert. And that's true, and it works. That's why so many designers do pick a niche. And it worked in this instance. The client couldn't pass up this opportunity to work with a designer who specializes in her industry. And not to mention that, it was a lower price than what I had quoted. So she canceled with me, lost her deposit, and hired this other person. And I don't blame her for that. It sounds like a great deal. Now, back to the phone call I got from the client this week. She contacted me and told me what had happened. She told me about hiring this other designer and why she had put the project on hold with me. And then she proceeded to tell me how much of a nightmare this other designer is to work with. They had completed the project, the logo and website, but not to the client's liking. And she wanted to know if I would be willing to take over the project going forward. So here's what happened. The client told me that this designer, when they approached her, seemed like a perfect fit for her project. So he discussed things with her and sent her a quote, and they agreed upon a price, half to be paid up front and the second half upon completion. And the client then proceeded and gave him her credit card number, which is something you should never do, is hand out your credit card number, but she did. And the designer, once the deposit was given, started on the project. Now, a few weeks later, the client got her credit card statement and noticed that the deposit was converted from US funds. Now, both the client and the designer she hired are in Canada. So naturally, the client just thought that the quote that she had been given was in Canadian dollars. And looking back, nowhere on the invoice does it say that the quote was in US funds or that she had to pay in US funds. And she doesn't remember the designer ever mentioning it. So she contacted the designer and questioned him about this. And he told her that, well, all designers charge in US dollars, and that's just the way it is in this industry. And she should have done her homework before hiring him. And he just brushed it off. Now, she didn't know what to do with that at this point, but the project had already started. Now, for those of you who don't know, with the exchange rate between Canada and the US, right now that meant that the client was paying roughly somewhere between 30 and 35% more than she expected for the project, once you take the exchange rate into consideration. But as I said, at this point, the designer had already designed the logo, which the client liked, and had already started on the website. So, shrugging this off to a learning experience, the client let the designer proceed, and everything continued to go well with the project. It wasn't until the client started asking the designer for some changes that the designer's true demeanor came out. The client asked for some things to be moved around on the website. She didn't like the hierarchy that the designer was using for the information she had provided. But when she asked for these changes, the designer refused to make them. He told her that she's not a designer and therefore she doesn't know what she's talking about, and she should leave the designing to the expert. When she also told the designer that she didn't really like the color palette he was using for the website, the designer refused to change it. He said that he had a vision for what the website will look like, and he was going to stick to that vision. And he told the client, "Don't worry, the color will grow on you," which she said it never did. And as she was looking at the proof of the website, she noticed that some of the copy was stuff that the designer had written himself. It wasn't stuff she had provided, and she said it was good additions, but she didn't like the way it was worded. So she decided to log into WordPress herself and make some of the edits. Well, I guess the designer had a fit, accusing her of trying to sabotage his vision. The designer actually sent the client a message saying, "Will you please stop making changes to the website? If you start messing around, you're liable to muck things up, which is just more grief for me. You are not a web designer, so why don't you stick to the things you know and let me handle the website?" Now, could you imagine getting that sort of message from somebody you hired to work with? Not only that, but the designer revoked the client's access to the site. She had admin access. Well, after she went and made changes, the designer revoked her admin access so that she could only look at the site and nothing more. And he told her that if she wants changes made, that they had to go through him. But as stated earlier, the designer was refusing to make any changes that the client wanted because what she wanted to do went against his vision of what the website should look like. And to make matters worse, when the client started complaining that she didn't like the way he was designing the site and that there was stuff she didn't like about it, he sent her a message saying, "I received your input, but once again, I'm the designer. I've been doing this for a long time and I know a lot more about designing websites than you do. Please keep your opinion to yourself unless I ask for it." That's verbatim what he sent to the client. Now, at this point, the client's no longer happy with their arrangement, but according to the designer, the website's complete and he's asking for his final payment. And of course, she doesn't want anything to do with this designer anymore, which is why she's reaching out to me, someone who she's worked with before and someone who has always treated her well. Now, the saving grace in this whole situation is the designer did not get the client to sign a contract, which is a huge thing in our industry. If you are not using a contract, you should, because it can really help you in these situations. In this situation, the client was better off because she didn't. So she's not on the hooks with this designer in any way. Now, things still need to be finalized, but it looks like I'll be taking over this project in the coming weeks, and I'll have a lot of changes to make to the website. And the client actually says that she's looking forward to working with me on it. Now, I wanted to share this experience with you to illustrate how not to treat a client. As designers, we are experts. That's why people hire us. And we're especially experts if you focus on a particular niche. However, being an expert doesn't mean that you're better or above the client, or that the client's opinion isn't valid. A designer-client relationship is a partnership, one where you work together to complete a project. And that's the key focus here. You're working together. A designer may know more about designing than the client and can offer opinions, but a designer will never know more about the client's business than the client does. And in the end, the client is the one that has to live with all these decisions. So they should have the final say. And abusing this relationship in this way is a great way to lose a client. Now, maybe this designer didn't care. Maybe he's laughing now, thinking how smart he is. He got paid for the project, and now he never has to hear from this client again. But you know what? This client just so happens to be an influencer in her space, in her industry, the same space that this designer specializes in. So what do you think is going to happen when she starts telling people in her industry, in her space, in her niche, about the experiences she had working with this particular designer? Was it really worth it for him to get his own way? In the long run, I don't think it will be. I wish him luck, because if that's how he treats his clients, he's going to need luck. No matter how good you are, your business will not succeed if you drive your clients away, which is exactly what he's doing. I'll say it again. I've said this many times on the podcast over the years. Clients would prefer work with a good designer they like than an amazing designer they don't like. And that's what happened here. This person is a good designer. I've seen what they did, and I've seen their website and their portfolio. He is a really good designer. But the client just doesn't like him. In her words, he's a nightmare to deal with, and she doesn't want to have anything to do with him again. That's not how you treat your clients. Now, I know that you know better, but it's always good to hear these kind of stories, just to make you appreciate the relationships that you have with your clients. Treat them well, and they'll treat you well. What more can you ask for? So that's it. That's my story for this week. Now, I would love to know what you thought of this episode. Leave me a comment. Visit resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 246. Now, before I go, I want to remind you of this week's resource of the week, which was ScreenFlow. It's a great resource for recording your screen, making quick videos. It's also a great editor. I'll often bring videos in for other purposes just to edit because ScreenFlow makes it so easy to edit videos. And it's so easy to upload, whether you're uploading to YouTube. I have a Vimeo account. That's where I store my videos to share with my clients. So I upload directly to Vimeo and so many other platforms. So if you are on a Mac and you want an easy and efficient way to record your screen or record videos and edit and all of that, why don't you check out ScreenFlow at resourcefuldesigner.com/ScreenFlow. And as mentioned earlier, the Resourceful Designer community will be open to the public again on March 1st. So keep an eye out, and when ready, head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/community to join. So that's it for this week. A little short episode here with a very important message. Treat your clients right. Until next time, I am Mark DeCote, wishing you all the best with your design business, and as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.